Okay, so let's start with some setting out the data. So some certain things that I will not question. In society we find collective patterns of behaviors, collective behaviors. And those are genuine and widespread phenomena in human society. So what exactly are collective behaviors? On the analysis of such things as collective behavior, philosophers widely disagree. But the fact that there are things like collective behavior is something that I will not put into question. And I will not put into question either the fact that intentions that are in some sense collective and shared have a role in collective behavior. That's just to say that, for instance, this meeting is a sort of a collective behavior, and of course, when we talk about this meeting, for instance, if someone asks me, so why you and Elena and Maurizio went to Belgrade last week? Well, I can say, well, we were invited and we wanted to go to the conference, and so that's all what I take to be there. So in those two very general data are not something that I want to argue against. Okay, so those two things are compatible with different stances with respect to social ontology, namely different theory that tell us what social object, what social reality is made of. Okay, so start putting my cards on the table. My polemical target will be certain position in social ontology that thinks that collective behaviors and collective intentions are central, not just as in the sense that they are widespread phenomena, but they are central in social ontology. So what more specifically, my polemical target will be what I call the collective intentionality model, which roughly is Searle's theory, or if you want a minimal version of Searle's theory that other people that maybe disagree with Searle or other things, anyway, I think they accept, and whose central tenet is that collective intentionality is the ground of social reality. So what does it mean that? Well, roughly it means that collective intentionality is our main explanatory tools in giving an account of what is the reality of society. Okay, so slightly more precisely, we can flesh out this thesis in two more theses. Namely, the first one is that the collective intentionality is a central explanatory role in the constitution of social objects, roughly what I just said. And a little bit more into detail, collective intentionality is essentially involved in the ontological dependence of social objects on people. Okay, so it's another feature, general feature of an explanation of what society is. We have to give some sort of account of what social reality and people have to do one another. So it's very, very difficult to have a theory that says that society can do away with people altogether. It would be very implausible to think that we can have society without people. Okay, so in this very broad sense, everybody admits that as a constraint on the theory. But what I will argue against is that collective intentionality is essentially involved in providing such an explanation. Okay, so just an overview of the talk. I was in the first part, so I have three parts. The first part, I will argue that collective intentionality model implies that social reality is constituted by collective intention with a shared content. Okay, so we'll talk about a little bit more or about this model and focus on this feature. Then I will argue that this model is explanatory deficient, so it works to a certain extent for simple cases, but it cannot be applied in complex social situations. And I will spell out an alternative model and to the effect that the ground of social reality is constituted by documents and records that are produced according to certain specific procedures and are considered thereby valid and binding. So let's go to the first part. To sum up, the third theory of status function, which is like at the core of the model, the ontological dependence of social object on people is seen as a case of attribution of assignment of status functions to physical object or ordinary object. So to pick up an example that already showed up a lot of times during the seminar, what makes it the case that a piece of paper can function as a €5 note? Well, roughly the fact that there is a community of people that recognize it as having precisely that function, namely the function that it is that is collectively assigned to it. So what I want to focus your attention here is the following: that if the model says that social objects, social reality, social function are grounded, namely are explained by collective intentionality, then you need to say, since collective intentionality is your main, your only tools of explanatory tools, you need to say that there is a specific content that we ascribe to a certain kind of object in order to explain why those objects have a certain function. So in order to explain why certain pieces of paper made in certain ways have a certain value, you have to say that we ascribe a certain property, we understand what this property is, and we ascribe it to certain object, this very property. Otherwise, you don't have an explanation. So so far so good, because it's pretty plausible to think that more or less everybody knows what it means to have to be worth €5, and it's also pretty plausible that everybody is ready to acknowledge that things made like a €5 bill has this property of being worth €5. Okay. So what does it mean that social objects specifically depends for their existence and their nature on collective assignment of status function? Well, it means exactly that the content of the collective intentions has to be shared. Okay, each of us has to believe that we assign a particular function Y to objects of a certain sort X. Okay, I'm not here claiming. I'm not saying that this notion of being shared has to be implausible. My problem here is not the fact that it is shared. Okay, whatever the details are, I think that there is a sense in which we can say, for instance, if I say that I intend to go to the cinema tonight, and you say, well, I intend to go to the cinema. Well, we share the intention, we share content. So I have no problem with that. Okay, so you need just this very unproblematic notion of share. What is problematic about all of it is the fact that what we are talking about is the model of social reality. So we have to endorse some sort of continuity thesis about how the whole of reality works, and that's, for instance, what Searle explicitly does. This is a quotation by Searle. He says, well, collective mental phenomena of the sort we get in organized societies are themselves dependent on and derived from the mental phenomena of the individuals. This same pattern of dependence continues higher as we see that social institutions such as governments and corporations are dependent on and derived from the mental phenomena and behavior of individual human beings. Okay. So this is not just to say that we have to endorse some sort of methodological individualism. So I will sort of assume here methodological individualism, or at least nothing of what I'm going to say is against this view, namely the view that all intentionality is individual is in individual minds or brains, and thus also collective intentionality is at bottom a psychological phenomenon that concerns the individual. Okay? So I take for granted that more or less everybody agree on that. I'm not sure about the Hegelian, but probably after Sebastian's talk I will be more clear on that. Anyway, whether you endorse that or not, that's not really the point. The point is that is what I call the AC, namely not air conditioned, but the assumption of continuity, which is the core of this aspect of the model. Namely, the idea that the same sort of dependence of social phenomena on individual thoughts and behavior that we find in small groups and simple cases is to be found also in complex social situations. Okay? So that's a very consequence of what I was saying before, that if the theories tell us that the ground of social reality is collective intentionality, namely the assignment of function that we all do, so the only explanatory tools that the theory has is that we have to assign a particular, a specific function to a particular kind of object in order to explain why this object has a certain status or is a certain particular social object. So that's the only tool that the theory has, and so it has to give this very same kind of explanation, not just for simple cases, like I promise you to give you €5 or well, how it comes that this bill has a certain value, but also for more complex cases. Okay. So again, this was just what I said. Collective intentionality is the ground of social reality in the sense that features of social object depends on features of specific shared contents, and the continuity assumption, the assumption of continuity is true, namely the features of institutional and complex social realities, think about the stock markets or corporation, too depend on shared contents. Well, let me just say briefly that there are like two sorts of cognitive collective intentionality that involve a kind of a shared content. One is cooperative behavior, and the other is cognitive recognition. And well, cooperative behavior doesn't require what we could call a complete intentional content to be shared. But it still requires part of the content to be shared. And the only part is something like a common goal. So, for instance, if we cooperate to play a duet, we don't have to play the same part. No? It's going to be a very boring duet, by the way. I may play the violin while you play the piano, so we don't share the same content, but there is still a part of the content that we share, namely the goal of playing together a duet. Okay? Collective recognition require a more thoroughly kind of shared content. Namely, we have, just what I said before, we have collective recognition when people in a community recognize that something has a certain function, as for instance, when everybody agrees that pieces of paper produced in certain ways have given monetary values. Okay, and of course, the two kind of collective intentionality may work together, may work in tandem. An example of simple case, four friends decide to go camping for the weekend. They cooperate to assign responsibilities for setting up the tent, let's say 2 people, gathering the wood for the fire, let's say 1 person, and cooking, let's say the 4th guy. And as a result of this cooperative agreement, there is collective recognition of the role that each person has. Okay, that's something that's it's explicit in certain theory, but it's very natural to think. Well, collective recognition is more basic than the collective behavior, that the cooperative behavior. Well, that's, I mean, although cooperation is the full-fledged form of collective intentionality, collective recognition seems to be somewhat more fundamental. in that it yields the minimal requirement for there to be a social domain. That's, I mean, it's again sort of trivial if you think that if you really want to say that you require not just recognition but also collective behavior for there to be a society, then you will end up saying something like that. Well, you know, when everybody, all the members of a firm are sleeping or are on vacation, there's no firm. You don't really want to say that. So, and anyway, that's not really important because in any case we need some sort of shared content, okay? And the continuity assumption, in a way, concern collective recognition in any case, and so given the assumption of continuity, what is claimed about institutional reality is just an extension on what happens at less complex levels of social organization. So, to put it bluntly, if we want to have an account of the stock market within this model, we need to have some sort of story which is going to be a more complex story of the very same story that we have just told about the four friends going for camping, okay? Because we need to say that for every social status of the people, of whoever is in the stock market, there has to be some collective attribution of that very status. Okay? So in every case in which we have an institution, or more general, you know, people and objects possess the associated social properties in virtue of a collective recognition of such properties. Okay? But there comes troubles. Okay? So the first is that if you literally take the model as such, then you run into a lot of counterexamples. Okay? Because it is widely implausible to maintain that most of the people hold detailed belief about the social role or function of most of the objects and persons surrounding them. So it's plausible to maintain that everybody knows what is the function of a €5 bill, but it's very implausible to maintain that everybody knows what is the function of the chief executive organizer of some important, you know, or the president of the monetary fund, no? Which, I mean, and see, those functions are there, okay, because they do have a relevance for our life, okay. I don't have a clear idea about what is the function, what are the rights and the duties of the president of the monetary fund, but to be sure, his or her decision are relevant for me and for everybody here. Okay, but and again, notice that. The model requires that we should have detailed belief about those functions, because the only explanation that the model can provide about those functions is the fact that we assign to certain person and things certain function. Now you might still think, well, wait a minute, maybe this is really too hasty, okay? Maybe, yeah, if you take literally the model like. Here we have a problem, but maybe there is also a sort of obvious solution to the problem. And what would it be? Well, one might say, well, I do not need to have detailed knowledge of the function that I attribute implicitly to the, for instance, the chief executive officer of an enterprise in respect to its status, insofar as other people have it and have the disposition to defer them for such knowledge. Okay, so roughly here it's like Putnam notion of deference. So well, maybe I don't know exactly what are the function of this guy, but he has it because there are people who knows that, and you know, they ascribe those functions to them, and I'm ready to say that they are right. So whatever they claim. I'm ready to defer my attribution of function to those guys. And so we can call the people with the relevant knowledge concerning a given static function the experts. Okay, and here the expert, I mean, is in a sense different from the one which we were talking about yesterday. Are not the sociologists, but are the people, for instance, the other members of the CEO of the firm or whatever. Okay. So we have this version, this like improved version of the model, which is called the Cyan commerce purse. So, but still we have a problem because anyway it is still impossible to maintain that each social status requires specific experts about it. Okay, it's implausible to think that for every social function or every social object in general, there are a group of relevant experts. Okay, of course, then we can think about a way out of this problem and say, well, okay, maybe there are not experts, but you know, this guy, the chief executive officer, has signed a contract not to be there, and so there, you know, are all the relevant information. So I have just the disposition to say that whatever says the contract, that's the function of the guy. Well, that's a fix, but it's already, as we will see, quite a price to be paid by the model, because it's not completely clear that the model is still exactly in good shape then. And besides, look, it's not that if we still are within the model, we can say that the relevant assignments are done by the expert or the document. But we still need to say that the differential beliefs that we share are specific to each particular function. Because if we don't say that, we lose an explanation of why we have the function. We have to say that we at least have to have an idea that there is something like the role of the CEO of this firm in order to have to see that there is an intention to defer the attribution of otherwise we don't have an explanation, because the only ground for social reality is the collective intention. And again, well, can that be fixed with a more sophisticated story? Yeah, maybe it can, but again, so it's not really, as I think, as I will show, then we have to revise the model deeply. For instance, if we say that, well, it might be claimed that the differential belief that ground social institutions are very general, so we don't have this problem any longer. So it is plausible to maintain that nearly everybody has them. For instance, if we just require that, yeah, okay, we don't have to have the belief that there are, there is this particular social role, and then we defer to some expert with respect to this particular. So we just need to believe that there are social roles, we don't know about it, and that there are relevant experts or relevant documents. Okay. Well, if we do that, then again we have this problem, because how can all those sophisticated binding, constraints, rights, and obligations be real if their only purported ontological ground comprises rough and general belief? So if this is somehow is the right direction to go, but still then we have to add something on our in our explanatory tools, because if our explanatory tools are only collective attribution of function, then we have like an explanatory problem here, because it's not clear how we can say that, well, no, the attribution are general, but then the function are very specific. So what's going on here? So give me a story, And elaborating an account of how deference in such cases works means deeply changing the model. That's my next claim. And the second problem, which is related to the first one, is that within this model it's sort of difficult to explain to explain mistakes about social statuses. Okay, I have a story also about what is the problem to explain individual mistakes, but I don't have time now to spell it out. So just think of collective mistakes, which I mean, requires always a very strange counterfactual situation. But yeah, think that if you allow for an individual mistake, then by a sort of Sorites argument, you should allow at least the general possibility of a collective mistakes. Of a collective mistake of the same sign, although, I mean, a collective mistake would require very strange context, okay? For instance, consider a football match between Team A and Team B. Team A actually wins the match 3-1, but for some strange reason, everybody comes to believe that Team B won, okay? So would not everybody be mistaken? Well, that seems to be the intuition that we have. Now, if we discover that what we think is not what the historical fact were, then we would say that, well, everybody was mistaken. It's not that the change, the result of the match changes. Okay? And yet, this is not clear. How can we say that if the social status of the match depends only on the collective attribution, and everybody believes that the won, okay? So we can again think, well, couldn't we just use the deference solution before? Yeah, I mean, it's quite plausible to think that there is implicit deference to the relevant historical facts here, okay? So in the case of the football match, the final result depends not only on the attribution, but also on how many goals have been made by each team. And people may have false beliefs concerning the historical facts, and thereby have collective false beliefs about who won, okay? Yeah, okay, of course. This is good for things like football match, and probably for a big bunch of other social things, but how to really generalize the answer? Well, since collective mistakes may in principle involve basically every kind of social status and sociology in general, well, for instance, by signing a contract, I accept a lot of duties and rights regarding which I, just like everybody else, may entertain false beliefs. Yet, what established what are my duties and rights are not my belief about the contracts, but the content written in the text of the contract. That's why it's so important to know what is written in the content, and that's why there are laws that say that you can, you appeal to a judge and say, oh, I didn't know that I was deceived. Okay, but if you don't do that, you are buying what you have signed. So you have to do that, and there are laws that enable you to do that precisely because what is binding is the content of the contract. Okay? What about the alternative model that I want to present here in response to all these problems that the collective intentionality model has? Well, so again, remember where are we? So the collective intentional model implies collective recognition. Collective recognition requires shared intentional contents, namely collective assignment of status functions. And the complexity of many status functions in our modern societies and the possibility of mistakes, particular collective mistakes about social statuses, cast doubt on the tunability of the model. Okay. So take a case in which the model is sort of works okay. So like the simple case of a promise, we can describe in a very general and abstract way a promise as a phenomenon with two aspects. One is the act, namely there are two people that's like I promise you that I will pay you €2 by tomorrow, and this is the act which involves two persons and some action there. And then we have a content which is something like, well, the fact that I have an obligation, I am bound, and the fact that you have the right to claim money out of me if by tomorrow I will give you €5. Okay? And in normal cases, the relevant content, well, usually coincides with that of the intention of the parties involved in the promise. Okay, so that's why the model works in these cases, because we have an act, we have a content, and the content which gives, tell us which is the nature of the social object which is produced by the act, namely the fact that I have an obligation and you have a right, and of a certain particular kind of obligation, a certain particular kind of right. Well, it's precisely what we share in being involved in that. Okay. But then what about more complex cases? Well, so 5 minutes or a bit less. Okay. What about more complex cases? Yeah. In more complex cases, usually contents, the relevant contents are recorded on an accessible support document. Okay, so that suggests us that the model of collective intentionality works in simple cases only accidentally, because the relevant content does not need to be that of the intention of the participant to the social act. In most cases, we want that to be the relevant content, but when we are looking for an explanation of what is the reality of the obligation, what makes it the case that there is an obligation, then if we just look at the intentions, we are missing something. And so the relevant contents are always at least potentially public and potentially distinguishable from individual beliefs. Otherwise, we are collapsing again. We cannot account for collective mistakes, and we cannot account for outcomes that there are complex function. We don't have any idea about, but they still have they're still very relevant for our life. So in principle, we need a distinction between what one believes, or everyone believes about a certain social object, or the features that the social object has, and how the social features of O differs from its physical intrinsic features. So we still want to say that O is dependent on people. Okay, it's not that O has the social object as its feature intrinsically. And so in the document model, we have the social objects are grounded in publicly accessible content, and most of the time records and documents, which are in turn dependent on psychological status. And however, the psychological state that is required for the existence of a social object O is not a collective recognition of O. Rather, it consists in recognizes the relevant recorded content in the document as valid. So we need just that. Okay. And what is important here is that that makes the big difference between the collective intentionality model and the document model, namely that the content, the shared content that we still need to explain what's going on in social reality is not non-specific, and can be non-specific because the shared part of the psychological state has a non-specific general character, namely not only in the sense that it does not contain any specific attribution of social function, but also in the sense that it does not need to concern any specific document. So we don't need to have say that in order to ground the social reality of a certain very particular function of someone we don't know anything about. We don't need to have some sort of belief concerning him. We just need to believe in general that there are documents that ground it, and that's because we are moving from a model in which the ground of the social object is the intention, in one in which the ground of the social object is the content of some records, which is in principle public and in principle accessible by anyone. So the working hypothesis, and I think it's partly is an empirical hypothesis, is that the content of the shared belief, the ground's institutional and complex social reality, is that only established procedures makes documents valid and binding. So we are ready we just need that in general we are ready to accept whatever documents are done in a certain proper way as binding. So we are not happy with just writing down the things. We need stamps and all these kind of things, and namely established procedures. Of course, which procedures validates the document is a contextual matter, so and highly cultural dependent. So in certain cases, it's enough to appeal to the memory of the third-party witness. So in very formal cases. In other cases, we need to appeal to a legal contract or a paper or the law. Okay. So very last thing, the ground of social reality is not in the shared content of collective beliefs, and social reality does require some sort of shared belief. This is true, roughly, that certain documents are valid, but the explanatory role of the shared belief is not to provide the ground of specific features of social reality. Remember, the very problem of the standard model, of the collective intentionality model, is that either we buy into the implausible claim that we have very specific content in order to ground this very specific function, or we have an explanatory deficiency because we have very general content and specific features. So the ground of specific features of social object is in the relevant documents, and yeah.